Okay. Yeah, I'm done.
All right, excellent. So just to quickly confirm, everyone can see my screen. Okay. Well, thank you so very much, everyone, for joining our today's session. So this session is a part of our writing club. So this is an initiative that started a couple of months ago with the intention to meet on a monthly basis and discuss different subjects, challenges, or questions when it comes to how to improve your writing. So today we are going to discuss the pyramid principle and also try to practice. And see how we can apply it ourselves. So in terms of quick introduction, so my name is Julia Babachina, and I'm a lead risk specialist at Swift, and also I'm a director at Women Coding Community. I have over 10-year experience of working in IT and tech, mostly covering cybersecurity, risk, and privacy. And most of my career, or a great chunk of my career, I've spent working as a management consultant. And that's essentially is the place where I've learned in depth about pyramid principle. And I had the opportunity of practicing quite a bit when it comes to this very helpful principle. And what I wanted to do today is to share with you some of my knowledge, some of my experience, and hopefully inspire you to learn more and practice it more in your writing, because to be honest, for me, it was life-changing, career-changing to learn how to apply it in writing, because it does help significantly. So with that, I'm going to start and move on to the theoretical part. So first, we're going to cover that. Then what I wanted to do together is to look at the example of how pyramid principle works in practice using one of the McKinsey articles. And then, if we have time, which I hope we will, I wanted to practice a little bit with you. So I wanted to know if you guys have some sort of writing ideas which we can discuss and apply pyramid principle together. So that is the plan for today, and I hope that makes sense. I want to make this session interactive, so if you guys have any questions, don't wait until the end. Feel free to ask me as I go along. I will be checking in with you as I'm presenting each slide, but feel free to raise a hand or post a question in the chat, and then Madhura will stop me, and we can ensure that we answer any of the questions or concerns in a timely manner. All right, so that's the plan. Okay, so to begin with, for those who is not familiar with the concept, so pyramid principle was developed by Barbara Minto. So Barbara Minto is quite inspirational lady. She is an expert in executive communication, and she also been a consultant, quite successful one. So the pyramid principle, in essence, is a structured communication technique that focuses on presenting ideas and information in a clear and logical way. Like I already mentioned, widely used in consulting. It's widely used in all types of businesses. So from technical to kind of a soft side of business, marketing, you name it, it's applicable there. And there is a whole book written by Barbara Minto on the subject. So if you feel very inspired and very interested, you can always purchase it and have a look yourself, right? So the major inspiration for what we're speaking today about is Barbara Minto's book, The Minto Pyramid Principle. Okay, so now what I want to do is to essentially sell you a little bit more pyramid principle and get you excited about its benefits and how it can be applied before we actually have a look at it in a more theoretical sense. So when it comes to a pyramid principle, like I said, has numerous of benefits, right? So I'm not going to go through each of the 6. It's not exhaustive list in any shape or form. But one of the key things that...
Yeah, I think you were frozen.
Sorry?
Julia, you were frozen for a minute. I don't know if it was just me or...
Oh. Okay. Okay, so where did you lose me?
Yeah, for a second, but you can just restart. I think whatever you will continue probably.
Yeah. So I wanted to. So did you hear me speaking about the book?
Yes, the book which she has written.
Okay, excellent. So what I want to do now is discuss the benefits of the pyramid principle. Okay. So there's numerous benefits, like I just said. The list on the slide is not exhaustive in any shape or form, but one of the key benefits that I personally found in my experience is the logical flow. So by applying the principle, you are organizing your ideas in a hierarchical manner, right? So the principle ensures that there is a logical progression of your thoughts. So whatever you're trying to put on a paper, in a Word document or in your public speaking, for example, it gives that logical, nice flow, right? And ultimately, it makes it easier for the audience to follow any complex arguments that you are about to debate. I also found that pyramid principle helps with time efficiency, right? So when you apply the principle, it's structuring communication in a way that delivers the key message quickly and clearly, right? So you're not speaking with a lot of kind of, as we say in my language, with water, right? So you go straight to the point, right? And you actually have much more time to speak about what matters rather than diverging from the thought or from the narrative that you're trying to convey. And another quite important point and the benefit that I like about the pyramid is that it helps with audience persuasion, right? So by structuring your information in a way that's clear and logical and tailored to the needs of the audience, it pretty much makes communication more effective and allows you to guide your audience towards accepting your point of view, right? Accepting, debating, challenging, right? So whatever that is. So that's really, really great and cool benefit of applying principle, pyramid, sorry. So then what I also wanted to elaborate on is that today we're speaking about pyramid principle in the context of writing, right? As a part of the writing club. But actually, the principle is adaptable to all types of communications, right? So writing is one of the way how we communicate, right? And there is many sort of subtypes or types of communication, right? So beginning from thinking, proceeding with decision making, problem solving, answering questions, explaining, giving even feedback, right? So that's something that's quite common at the workplace, right? When we're giving a feedback. When we are not writing, but we're doing public speaking, when we're pitching, for example, when we're debating, when we're just doing general presentations. So this pyramid principle can be applied in all of this, right? And also, if your chosen way of communication is more graphic, it helps with visualization, with designing, planning, and mapping, right? So it's really cool, it's really flexible, it's quite adaptable, and it's just a matter of practicing in the different concepts when it comes to applying this pyramid principle. So that's me trying to sell you the benefits and the large scope of how it can be used. So before I go to the actual meaty part of the steps of application, any questions so far?
I don't think we have any questions. Anyone? Okay, all good.
Okay, excellent. All right, so now the exciting part. So let's have a look at this slide. And this, in essence, is a step-by-step process of how we are applying the pyramid principle. So first and foremost, so once we have a general idea, right, of what we want to, let's say in our context, write about, to follow the pyramid principle, we need to start with the answer and express our central idea. So central idea being a governing thought. So in the very first step, in the beginning, we identify the key message and provide the introduction. And one of the best ways how to do it successfully, to give an introduction to your idea, to your central idea, is to apply a situation, complication, question, and answer framework. So I'm gonna, in a couple of slides, I'm gonna go in depth about how to apply that for step 1, but just take record of this and we will discuss it in more detail. So applying the SCQA for your step 1 when it comes to introduction is something that is really helpful and ultimately helps with applying pyramid principle efficiently. So once we've provided introduction to our thought, so we have our situation, complication, question, and answer, we proceed to second step of grouping supporting ideas, right? So what we're essentially doing, we're opening up our step 1 and we are organizing our ideas and key messages, right? So for example, for a central idea, there can be 3 points in terms of how we arrive to that central idea. And that's in essence is where that part starts. So that's in essence is the beginning of your main body of your writing, right? And again, to help you to do that efficiently, there is a very helpful principle called MISI, so mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive principle. And that ultimately will help you to do your main body of writing in an efficient way. And then again, take record of the MISI principle. We're going to speak in a couple of slides in more detail about it. And then we can have a little debate and questions and answers about that. So once we identified the introduction, we identified our key ideas. It's very important to proceed to the step 3 of providing the evidence, right? So we determined key ideas, right? So we need to back up our argument, right? So we need to provide supporting ideas with evidence. So this can be research, case studies, statistics, interviews, so whatever method you can use. But the whole point is you need to make your key points from the step 2 valid, and hence the step 3 is important. That's where you back it up with the research, with the analysis that you did on the back, right? So that is for point 3. And then another 2 points that I wanted to mention, that as an overarching exercise to point 1, 2, and 3, it's really important to keep in mind that we need to adapt to the audience, right? So knowing your audience is very important. So who they are these your general readers? Are these professionals? Are these experts? Are these beginners, right? And then based on that, we match the language. So for example, for experts, we are going to use technical terms, right? Industry-specific languages. Whereas for a general reader, we will avoid the jargon and use sort of layman terms to convey our ideas and our thoughts, right? We also adjust tone and formality. We tailor content, its depth and complexity, right? And that, again, will help us to keep audience engaged, right? So for example, myself as a general, let's say, audience, if I join extremely technical talk, for me it will be hard to, let's say, to stay focused, right? Because I will sort of lose the plot, and vice versa, right? If I'm joining a session that is on my subject matter, and it's quite broad, then for me that just might not be as interesting, so hence I will not be as engaged, right? So that point is extremely important to consider. And then the bottom line, it's all about iteration and refinement, right? So as we proceed with our writing, with our ideas, we need to always come back and reiterate on step 1, 2, and 3 and ensure that we do all the adjustments that are required. And usually this is in light of you obtaining feedback, let's say, from your manager, from your friend, from your peer on your piece of writing, and you just refine, reiterate, and perfect it to pretty much the standard that you're happy with. So that's a step-by-step process of applying the pyramid principle. Any questions?
Yes, I think we have one question from Nada.
Mhm.
I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is there a specific length for each part?
Yes. So when it comes to each part and the length of it, I'm going to cover at the next slide because I think it will be a little bit more representative. So just bear with me, okay?
Is there anything else you want to know, Nada? Is that Does that answer? I mean, does that help? Okay.
Yeah,
All
I'll
right.
try to help you at the next slide. So this slide is about the step-by-step process, right? And the next slide that I prepared for you guys, this is ultimately the product of those 3 steps, right? So that is a template which I really would like you to take away from today, and just print it out, put it in your notebook, and just keep it sort of as a guidance, right? So what essentially here this slide shows is how these 3 steps are applied and how they work in practice. So we have our introduction. In our introduction, we have situation, complication, question, and answer when it comes to the subject that we're exploring. We're having a governing thought, right? So that is our step 1, where we are providing an introduction. This is the top of our pyramid, right? Then, once we've done that, we are proceeding to the main body. So we are doing the point 2. We are introducing our key ideas. In this example, I've put key ideas, 3 key ideas, right? So the point of 3 is something that maybe you heard that people usually advise on. If you do some writing, have 3 key points. Don't go above, don't go beyond. That sort of is a usual practice. But to answer your question on the length, right? So it always depends on what you're trying to achieve. So if you're writing a blog post, right, there is no need to have long, lengthy paragraphs, right? You must probably have around 500 words. So having a couple of key ideas is more than efficient. If you're writing an academic dissertation, of 20,000 words, potentially you would require, obviously giving your question and the complication that you're exploring, much more key ideas. So it's always depends on what you're trying to achieve. And also, one of the key things that dictates, I guess, on the length and on the amount of key ideas is your scope, right? Because we can write in a never-ending way, right? You can pretty much most probably every subject that is there out there, you can never exhaust. There is so much research out there, so many academic writing, it's unbelievable. But the idea is that when it comes to your writing, you need to be very clear on your scope. So, let's say you're writing about types of hardware. If your idea is to evaluate all types of hardware, I mean, that's fine, usually quite unlikely because there's a lot to cover. But what you can say in your scope, you can acknowledge that there's so many types of hardware, but for the purpose of what you are doing, you want to explore just 2, right? So that's something else that also dictates you and helps you with identifying the right amount of words or sentences or paragraphs that you need to have for each of the points. Yeah. So I hope this answered your question. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. So I just wanted to provide you with a quick clarification before I'm going to jump to explaining situation, complication, question, answer, and MISI. So one of the things that I found from my experience, what a lot of people get confused with, is answer and governing thought. So a lot of people say that it's the same thing. I actually think slightly differently. And again, once you get more familiar with the subject, you can take your own stance. But the bottom line is, governing thought, it's very important, that needs to be included in your introduction. And a governing thought is an overarching idea or the principle that you're trying to communicate, right? Whereas the answer, it's more specific, and it's specific, obviously, to the question that you are exploring. So governing thought expresses the central idea of your article, which pretty much is inspired and educated by your answer, but they're not necessarily the same things. They're definitely are friends. They definitely are interconnected, but the governing thought provides a broader context, while the answer provides a focused response based on the context and the question examined. Does that make sense?
I think so. If you can elaborate quickly, I know you're going to jump into an example, but if you can just give a quick example, how do they slightly differ? I understand, I think, what the governing thought is. Just a quick example, if you may.
All right, so let's have a think. So let's say the governing thought is that women coding community aims to empower women in technology and innovation sector, right? The question for that can be, how what does women community does to empower women in technology and innovation? And the answer will be, women coding community is empowering women by leading the workshops, by organizing tech talks, by organizing conferences, and by ensuring that the community has access to conference tickets, to resources, and to community and network of people to engage with, right? So answer is something that's more specific, and the governing thought is an overarching idea of what, in our context, women coding community is. Does that sort of help? That was literally from the top of my head.
No, I think it does. It does. It's like, it's a very broad idea what you want to achieve, and then coming down to like how is it that it relates to that. Yeah, I think
exactly. So the pyramid principle, it's all about hierarchy. We start from high level and we go every time level lower, depending on what we're trying to achieve, right? So we pretty much start with our situation, which is really high level, and we're going to get to it in a minute. Then we explain complication of what we're dealing with. Then off the back of that complication, we have a question, right? And then in the introduction, in the contrary to some of people believe, we actually provide an answer to the question, right? And then all of this is wrapped with that general idea that you're trying to convey. So let's say you're going to read an article which uses pyramid principle. You come to work and you say, hey guys, I read this really cool article, and someone will ask you, oh, what was it about? You're not going to go into situation, complication. You're going to straight say, the governing thought of that article was this. And then they will be like, oh, that's interesting. How did this governing thought came about? Well, it actually came about because there was this situation, this really tricky complication, and the author posed this question, got this answer, and came essentially to this overarching idea.
Right. Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah.
Does this answer your question? I think it's a little different to what I have asked, but so I'll just read out what Lean has written. I have always this problem, how to manage intro. Sometimes it's too long, sometimes I make it too short. So please, have you any advice for this?
So my general feedback when it comes to these such of questions is, when it comes to introductions, always try to avoid descriptions as much as possible, right? So there is always, the what and the how. So you want to make your introduction as informed and tight as possible, right? And then you have your main body with key ideas, with evidence, when you can be more descriptive and you can open up your narrative much more. So if in a very condensed way, you explain the situation just for a general context, then complication, question, and answer, that's, as long as you capture these main things, you don't really need to go into anything else. And I think maybe for you, it was always a challenge because maybe at some times you were not entirely sure what actually to capture in your introduction. But I think if you will try to capture point one summary in your introduction, it will make it much easier, and actually it will sort of become more natural to you, and you will feel whether what you're writing is enough or you need more, right? So it's all about, have you practiced enough to explain what's a complication and question and answer and so on and so forth. So I think just be very careful with descriptions, right? Think more about so what. Every time you write any sentence in your writing, always ask, what's the meaning of it? Does this add value? Or is it just something I'm adding to, just for the length, or it's just my sort of brainstorming. And that's where the reiteration point comes in, because sometimes I write and I just brainstorm everything, and then I take a step back and I'm like, right, but what's my actual answer? And then I go back to my writing and I start sort of filtering out what's needed, what's not needed. So I hope that helps. Okay, any other questions?
None at this point.
Okay, excellent. So I've actually quite a bit already explained the situation, complication, question and answer, but let me just reiterate a little bit more, right? So when we're working on our introduction, as I said, this principle really works, this framework. So situation ultimately establishes the context and the background. So when you're introducing your writing to someone, you want to provide some information on the topic, right? Especially, let's say, if someone is not familiar with it, right? So it provides necessary information that the audience need to know to understand the topic. So here, obviously, we need to be careful. Again, going back to my descriptive comment from the previous slide, when we provide just enough of description of the situation to enable person to further follow the subject. So we don't need to go all the lengths. We just need to provide context on the situation essentially in the space of what we're doing. So not more, not less. But again, don't worry, it takes practice, okay? Because in theory, everything always seems quite easy, but actually to practice this is quite tricky. So the complication part needs to highlight the challenges, issues, or problems that disrupt the status quo, right? So we need to essentially say that we have this situation, and when it comes to this situation, there is this tension, there is this question, or there is this challenge that essentially persists, right? Because if there is, I assume there may be a situation when there is no complication. I personally haven't read really at such pieces of work, I think, recently, where there wouldn't be a complication, but there always needs to be some sort of challenge, right? That needs to be sort of addressed. It's the same as when you think about watching a movies, right? There is always some sort of situation, right? And there is always some sort of challenge that the main character is trying to address. So maybe try to think about of yourself as a key character in the movie, right? So if you think about it, right, every movie has a situation, has a complication, right? And then question, and then ultimate answer in the beginning, in the end, right? So that's sort of kind of even in the filmmaking, I think this can be applied, right? So then the question part is that this essentially is this pivotal element that arises from the situation and the complication. And that's something that ultimately you're trying to answer in your piece of writing. And then the answer is essentially a final part that presents the solution or the recommendation that you ultimately arrive to, right? Which you arrive pretty much in the end of your research. It's just that you presented in the beginning. Right, so that's in essence it. And when it comes to SQA, it does ensure that everyone is on the same page from the start. So the person that reads your piece of work, they will know from the beginning what they're dealing with, if that's something they're interested in knowing, and if that's something that they want to read further, right? It minimizes this ambiguity, and it defines expectations, avoids any surprises and any scope creeps, right? So that's the ultimate sort of idea of it. So any questions on CQA?
None in the chat, but please raise your hand if you want to just. Okay, good. We can continue. Yeah.
All right, and then before we start practicing, and we'll look in the McKinsey article, I just wanted to also clarify on the second step, where I was speaking about MISI, a problem-solving principle useful to group your ideas. So we did our introduction, great. We're proceeding with the main body. We have our key ideas. So what is helpful to consider is that our key ideas they need to be mutually exclusive. So what does that mean? It means that each category or the item are distinct. They do not overlap. So there's not a single item or the idea that should belong to more on or one category. Equally, your key ideas need to be collectively exhaustive. So together, the categories or items should cover all possibilities or aspects of situation, right? So nothing should be left out. I must say that especially collectively exhaustive is something that is really hard to practice, right? Because you actually never actually know the exhaustive list of everything, right? That's just life. But what can help you to stay collectively exhaustive is ensuring that you're very clear on your scope, right? So, for example, when it comes to my recent example with women coding community, right? So there's so many things how we are helping our community. But let's say for the purpose of my answer, I want to focus only on women community organizing and leading, career talks, tech talks, and in-person events. So I don't want to look at anything else for the purpose of what I'm doing, because that's my primary focus. As long as you acknowledge this in your introduction, that I think solidly meets the collectively exhaustive principle. So I guess another example that I can give you. So again, if I'm going back to sort of more IT example, right? So let's say our question is, why is the system experiencing frequent downtime, right? So we can look at different categories to examine this question. So we have hardware, we have software, we have network, operational related factors, so on and so forth, right? So these categories are mutually exclusive. So hardware is not going to overlap with, I don't know, operational issues, right? They're quite distinct categories, right? And together, they also cover all possible reasons of downtime, right? So they are collectively exhaustive. So that's is another example of sort of demonstrating the MISI. But like I said, it's quite tricky to practice. I don't think it's ever really possible to get the 100% of it, but you need to aspire to meet it to the best of your ability. And then I think that's going to really help with applying the whole of the pyramid principle in your writing, and ultimately ensure that your writing is great. So that's on the MISI principle. Any questions?
Just not question, but just to clarify. So in the example that you just mentioned, right, network, application, then software going down, and so in that case, you wouldn't have. So the idea is that you wouldn't repeat something, like you wouldn't have a second paragraph of like front-end applications and back-end application going down. You would just club it together as applications, and that would be your one category of.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Unless you have a good reason not to, which again is okay, as long as you explain. So in general, like with anything, when it comes to writing, speaking, communication, or studying, there is nothing wrong with, let's say, going off the main rule, right? Or something that, as long as you can justify why that's the case and why that is going on. So if it comes across that you haven't thought about it and you just proceeded with it, that sort of doesn't send a good message. But if you acknowledge that you're doing it for some great purpose, then that's absolutely fine, right? Because maybe there will be some particular question or context when it needs to be like that, when your applications need to be, disgrouped. Have a question, right? As long as you explain that to the reader, I personally think that's totally fine.
Yeah, so it depends on the situation and what you're writing about.
Exactly. And I know that it doesn't help because my most common answer will be, but it depends. But like with anything in life, it really depends, because it's all about what you're trying to achieve. And these frameworks, they're there to help you, to guide you, right? For you to get inspired. But ultimately, it always depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you.
All right. So now, when we covered the theory, what I wanted to do is to evaluate an example, right? So let's spend a couple of minutes reading through the report by McKinsey, Why Diversity Matters. So Madhura will share with you a link in a chat. So I'm conscious of time. Most probably you require much more minutes to get familiar with the topic, but just to get an idea about what article is about. And then I wanted you to have a look with me on how I broke essentially that article down into steps 1, 2, and 3, and how I pretty much put it in the template that I have showed you before. So I hope that will help you. To understand a little bit more in practice how that works. So let's spend a couple of minutes. So now is 46. So let's spend 5 minutes or so, so until 51 minutes, and then spend some time going through the template with the content from the article. Okay? Does that sound good? Let us know if someone has trouble with accessing the article.
I think everybody can access it.
Okay, excellent. All right. So I hope you guys spend a couple of minutes on exploring the article. I'm conscious of time, so what you can do after the session is to go through this over again and apply the pyramid principle. But what I wanted to do now is for us to pretend that we are consultants from McKinsey and we did all this research on understanding diversity, right? We did a lot of research, we did a lot of analysis, and now we actually need to start writing our report. So we need to structure our ideas, we need to structure what we've learned before we can start writing, right? So as a first point, we need to start with introduction and with our governing thought. So when it comes to the research, we understood that the situation is that many companies recognize diversity as important. So that's a situation, no one is arguing with that. The complication that we found was that despite the efforts, the companies struggle to see financial and innovative benefits of diversity. And in light of this complication, right, we asked ourselves a question. So how can diversity drive business success, right? So we have a situation when everyone appreciates it and it all makes sense. We struggle to see essentially how actually diversity helps, and we want to ask ourselves, so how does it actually does that, right? And off the back of our research, we found that diversity must be paired with inclusion. Companies need to foster diverse leadership teams, track progress, and encourage an inclusive work culture. So that is the ultimate answer. And in light of our SCQA, the governing thought is that the companies with diverse workforces outperform those without the diversity. So this is ultimately governing thought of the article that you just got yourself familiar with. So any questions on that?
I think I have one question to
Yeah,
actually.
go for it.
The situation is many companies recognize diversity as important, right?
Mhm.
So the governing thought is companies with diverse workforce outperform those without diversity. Uh, okay, I see. Okay, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, I've read the article obviously, right, a couple of times, and like what I understood is that so McKinsey starts with establishing the current business environment, right? Then where companies face increasing competition and they're seeking new ways of improving performance, right?
Right.
The situation also includes recognition that diversity has become a key topic of discussion, right, in corporate leadership. So everyone always speaks about it.
Yeah.
We have our DAE committees, departments, and so on and so forth, right? So then, in light of that, right, the businesses strive to innovate and grow in a globalized market with the diversity in mind, right?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
what they're doing, they're looking at it as an enabler to their success, right?
Mhm.
So they're doing a lot of things. They acknowledge that it's important. They don't see pretty much any sort of positive return on investment, right? And the
Right.
question is, so what actually can be done so it is an enabler?
Okay. So the overarching thought is that diversity is good. And
Absolutely.
then, and
I
then
would
there
not
is
read
this
an article that
complication.
states
Yeah.
otherwise.
And then there is this complication that they're not seeing the financial benefit or the innovative benefit of it. And then how do we, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So that's at least what I understood. But once you read it in more detail, I mean, feel free to challenge. I'm happy for for a debate. So that's in essence is the introduction. And then when it comes to grouping the supporting ideas, right? So McKinsey in this report, they had three general points, three ideas that I essentially took from it. Diverse teams lead to innovation, so they are not arguing with that. Diverse companies outperform financially, so that is essentially the fact that they established. A diverse workforce opens up access to a larger talent pool. Right. So the governing thought is that companies with diverse workforce outperform those without diversity through innovation, through financial gain, and through a larger talent pool. And
Right.
then what they did, they provided essentially a evidence for each of these points. So when it comes to innovation, they pretty much said they found a study of 366 public companies across various industries and showed that companies with diverse leadership are more likely to innovate. So that's off the back of 366 public companies study. When it comes to financial part, so what they found is that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity are 25% more likely to have above average profitability. So on and so forth, right? So that's, in essence, the evidence that they provided to back up their key ideas. Does that make sense?
I think so. Any questions at this point from anyone? No.
All right. So it's quite heavy to take in, and we went through this part quite fast. But if any questions, feel free to ping me on Slack, and I'm happy to address. But that's pretty much the overview of the McKinsey article. And what I wanted to do now is to have a more chat with you guys if you have any questions. So any questions in terms of what has been presented. And ideally, what I would like to do with you is also to practice. So if you have a writing idea that you've been sitting on for a while, and you would like to practice it and see how it could be applied in the pyramid principle context, this is your chance. So go for it. And I will try to help as much as I can.
Anyone? You can just type into the chat box.
You can, yeah. If it's possible, you can speak out, raise a hand, or type in a chat.
Oh, Mabel has. I was wondering, would you have any examples of tasks you have received at work where you have had to put together a writing piece like this?
Yeah. So for me, so the most common, well, again, back in consulting, right? So it's all about writing proposals, right? So one of the things that consultants do, they they sell services, right? They sell services in particular subjects, so it can be really anything, right? So I worked in IT, in cybersecurity, and we would get a lot of business in that sort of sense, right? So what would happen was that the customer, the client, would come in with a challenge, let's say in the cybersecurity space, right? And they are essentially are looking for a solution to their cybersecurity problem, right? And what we consultants would do, we would produce a proposal in terms of how we would address their challenge, right? So usually that's the complication and the question part that they would present us with. And for that, that's essentially is your best friend. You would use the pyramid principle, also referred to as top-down thinking, to produce that approach, to produce that proposal, which ultimately explains logically and hierarchically to the client, to a customer, how you would essentially address their challenge, right? So, because consulting is all about problem solving, and pyramid principle is pretty much excellent in terms of conveying a narrative of how you go about problem solving. So yes, and that's in essence, it can be, in a Word document type of proposal, it can be in PowerPoint type of proposal. So it can be really any format, right? And then obviously what happens, right, is that if you're successful, let's say with your proposal at the initial stage, you proceed with pitching, right? So you actually go on the client site and you present your proposal, but in person you present it obviously as sort of in a public speaking manner, right? And that's when you pretty much transcend your writing into a speaking. And when you speak, it's essential to follow a tight structure in a way that will keep people's attention, right? It will be clear, it will make sense. There will be all the key ideas will be clear, the governing thought, the answer, everything is clear. And that's again when you essentially apply this principle. So that's, I think, for me, the most common scenario where I would use this. Yes.
I think Mabel wants to know if there is a concrete example that, I would be happy to see an example of consulting writing proposal so we could practice. Is there something that comes to your mind which is not proprietary, but just
Yeah,
a general,
that's the whole point, because most of the things I can't really share publicly this way.
general idea of
In terms of the questions, so let's take something general, right? So as you know, right, we live in a very dynamic landscape. I particularly work in financial services. So dynamic landscape from many aspects, from market competition, but also from regulatory perspective. So very often we have a lot of new regulations that are coming in. We have a lot of new amendments to existing regulations that happen, which ultimately impact business and organizations in which we work, right? So very, very common way is that, sort of scenario is that the companies are looking for advice on how to comply with, let's say, certain legislations, with certain regulations, right? So one of the loudest ones that happened some time ago, and that I worked quite a bit on, was around GDPR, so General Data Regulation, right? So that was a very important regulation that everyone was super concerned with, because it's pretty much came with a very hefty fine if you're not compliant. So ultimately, one of the most common requests that I used to deal with is companies reaching out and saying, hey, my question is, what do I need to do to be compliant with the regulation, right? And the complication of that question, obviously, was that there is a new regulation that came in. That's the complication. The question is, what do I need to do to comply with it? And then you go on the ground, you do the research, you perform your assignment, right? And you find, let's say, certain areas in which particular organization is not compliant with. And that's where you provide them with the answer. So you can say that, the new regulation came in, you asked how you can be compliant with it. Our answer is based on our research that, let's say, in terms of how you handle your personal data, there can be improvements. That's the first key idea. Second key idea, your access control maybe is not as stringent. That's the second point, let's say, or another key idea. And then let's say third key idea may be that you have a lot of you don't organize your data according to categories, and you don't apply data classification. So let's say that's the first point. So that's one of the kind of scenarios that I can provide off the back of my experience. Does this provide a little bit more clarity to your question?
Mabel, does that answer your question? Does that help? Yeah, okay. Yep, perfect. Do we have time to practice an example, or
Yeah, I think we definitely should. Anyone has a particular idea for the piece of writing that we could break this down into?
Anybody? Otherwise, we could go with. I could ask some. I've been thinking on maybe that we could just approach this. Like for instance, if I want to write something on how how, how do we do green software
Okay.
or something, that just a broad idea. So at this point, my governing thought would be um, how to make software green. Is that
Well,
but that's a question.
that
That's my
would be your
question.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's my question. So I need to have an overarching. So would I go with something like soft? Well, the code we write is not green. Is that my overarching thought, or
So
should be doing something good for the environment? And how can we as engineers help? Is that my overarching thought?
yeah, so that sounds more like it. So so your question is how can we make code greener, right? So your complication should be why it's an issue that the code is not green, right? So that will be your complication. So it's not green because sorry, if it's not green, we have these following implications. So that's your complication. So the fact that the code is not green creates some sort of issue, challenge, complication, right? So I'm not subject matter on this, so I don't know, but
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we can. Yeah, okay. So the complication is that just before we proceed on that thought, I think Lean has asked a question. So I don't want to ignore her question. We don't
yeah,
just.
yeah.
So she says, please, how to present a project to improve a work team, to improve a work team. Is that what you want to write on Lean? Or you want to just present the project?
How to present.
How to present a project to improve a work team.
A work team.
So, do you want to elaborate a little more on the question?
Yeah, just if you don't mind elaborate a little bit, so I can understand
Yeah, you
the.
can type it in the chat itself.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Is it that you want to present the idea to avoid conflict? Okay, I see. So you want to write an article on, let's say, I mean, we go with article. You want to write an article how to avoid conflict? Yes. Okay. Yes.
Okay, so if I understood your questions correctly, so obviously it's always depends on the profile of your writing, right? So if you're doing something personally, then I assume this question is not very relevant. Let's say if you came up with a piece of writing that you want to publish in your organization, right, which everyone will be able to read on some particular subject, my advice is to always engage, obviously, people in, let's say, your idea from the beginning. So let's say if you're writing about a trend in your field, and I think if you're posting it in the work specific environment, collaborate with your immediate colleagues, let your boss, your manager know that that's something that you want to do. Because if, let's say, you're producing something and you have a great idea, but maybe for some reason, when it comes to your organization, it may be found as controversial, maybe it's not aligned with some of the company's policies, right? You want to avoid that. So that's when you can piss someone off, right? And you don't want that. So it's important to engage with the required people from the onset, and then they will be able to provide you feedback. They will able to provide you with the policies and say what you can write, what you can't write in the context, right? And I mean, obviously, general rule of thumb, if it's a particular situation or something that you're trying to present, I mean, anonymize it as needed, as required, right? So ensure that you're not pretty much breaching anyone's confidentiality or privacy, right? So that's quite important. So sort of things like that. But I think it's just always, don't do it in isolation, because the quality will significantly be improved from as much exposure and engagement and feedback anyways, right? But on top of that, it will reduce the likelihood of you getting in trouble with someone as well, right?
I think do you want us to take that as an example for the writing? Like, do you want to write an article which is for workplace conflict? Is that what you're looking for? Like, what would be the governing thought for it, or what are the questions or the situation? Is that what you're trying to get from us?
Actually, it's just every time. Well, it, first of all, excuse my English. I have this
Don't worry
problem.
about it.
Don't worry about that.
That it's sometimes it's difficult to address for each person in the team. There
Mhm,
are sometimes sensual issues between them, and I want to keep my opinion like objective and lucid.
mhm, mhm. Well,
So I
yeah. Well, you see, regardless of people's opinion, right, there will always also be some sort of like centralized person that sort of can, regardless of people's opinion, tell you if it's okay or not, right? So, for example, communication team in your organization, right, for example, will tell you is this appropriate or not. Your line manager, regardless of, let's say, your peers may be disagreeing on some points, if your line manager ultimately overrules that and says, yes, that's fine, I like it, then that's pretty much is okay. So then there comes a question how comfortable you are with keeping some of your peers unhappy, right? But then, again, if you keep everyone always happy, then that sort of becomes tricky for you in terms of progression. So it's sort of, balancing these things and trying to find, someone who is gonna be sort of withdrawn from situation and can provide sort of, um, you know, um, I guess this objective opinion without getting into kind of emotions and stuff like that. I don't know if that answers your question, but let me know.
yes, you do. Thank you so much.
All right, excellent.
Any more questions? Any thoughts? Anything you want to clarify with Julia?
I mean,
Mm,
obviously, guys, if there are any afterthoughts, because I know
yeah,
that it's been quite a lot, it's quite intense presentation. Any afterthoughts, feel free to reach out on Slack or LinkedIn, whatever works for you. I'm happy to answer any questions. But yes, but please take a screenshot of this template and keep it somewhere handy. And I hope that will help you with your writing.
yeah, definitely. Um, it's been good learning actually, because Misi has been confusing me for quite some time, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah, it's the hardest one I think to
Uh,
practice because it's
you come across it and you don't really understand what is mutually
mm,
exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So,
yes, it is very tricky,
yeah,
because yeah, but like I always say, it really depends on the scope, because it's really hard to make exhaustive list of everything, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
apply your common sense and the scope, right? Because you don't need to go into nitty gritty little details of everything. I think if you capture the most important points, the most important categories, you're already winning, right?
yeah.
So that's sort of how I see it. So it's important to take it, I think, a
I
little
think
bit pinch of salt.
the scope and the length of the article also matters, right? If you know that you're going to write a one pager, you
Exactly.
wouldn't go collectively exhaustive. You
No,
wouldn't
no,
go
no,
for
no, no. But
100 points.
exactly, because what do you do in that context? You acknowledge the exhaustive list of things in introduction, but you say, but for the purpose of this short piece of writing, I'm going to look just in one category, actually,
Yeah, exactly.
and that's absolutely fine as long as you explain yourself. Everything is okay, almost everything.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? On that one pager, I would like to ask is, how would you determine what is the most important? Like, let's say I come up with three mutually exclusive. I want to write only one pager because whatever I reasons, I want to just print it out on one page. Is there anything? How would I prioritize what is my most important?
But that depends on your question, right?
Oh, I see what I'm trying to answer at that point.
Exactly. It depends on your question because you may have 3 key points, right? But
Right.
you can say, I will prioritize in this first part, in this first one pager, this because this is more timely. I got more questions about it. And let's say this week, this is the question of the week. I'm applying it. I'm talking about it here. It's about the question, right? What you're actually trying to capture exactly.
Right.
Because sometimes maybe it's really hard to prioritize and you will just say these 3 points are very important. They matter equally for the
Yeah.
purposes of what I'm doing, but because I need to start somewhere, in for no reason I'm choosing this particular first key idea for this first piece of writing. Next week I'm capturing that, but it doesn't mean that it's secondary. It's
Okay.
just that's kind of
Good.
the of my writing, right? So you
But
just explain, and that makes sense then.
but you would never actually combine those three. Let's say I have three, but just because they're equally important, you wouldn't advise to combine them into one paragraph and put it.
Well, it depends, right? Again, so if you have, let's say an essay of 2,000 words, you can cover all three. If you're
Mhm.
producing a 3-part blog for
Mhm.
women coding community, you don't have the luxury of that much space. So,
Right.
first week you write about key idea 1, second about key idea 2, and then in the third blog post you write about key idea 3. If it's an essay, which is much more space, if it's some sort of, academic, semi-academic piece of writing, you can explore all of it.
Right. Right. Okay. That makes sense. All right. Thank you.
No,
Any other questions from anyone? I have put the feedback form, so please do leave us a feedback so we just know, what sessions you want or what improvements we can do the next time. I'll again post the Slack link as well. So please do join. If you're interested in volunteering, if you're interested in talking to Julia one-on-one, please do join the Slack channel and connect with her. We have writing club, so your blog will be posted on our website, so that's an incentive to join us.
yes, absolutely. And guys, we're hosting writing club. At least we really do try our best to do it on a monthly basis. So stay tuned with LinkedIn updates, with meetup events link. We are gonna essentially try to present you with different type of sort of challenges and topics, but also feel free to let us know your ideas. If there is particular writing related challenge you would like to explore, just let us know and we will try our best to find a good presenter for that. So we have our Slack channel as a channel on for specific for writing club, so writing club writing underscore club, right? Just reach out there and suggest our ideas, so we're more than happy and very open to that as well.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Let me stop recording first. Stop recording.